Thanks to everyone for joining. As we all know, unfortunately, COVID-19 continues to cause devastating consequences throughout the country, with nearly 400 deaths and over 5,000 new hospitalizations every day. And just yesterday, provisional CDC data indicated that U.S. life expectancy fell again in 2021, in large part due to COVID deaths. Although the current COVID-19 surge is waning overall, it's predicated that we'll enter yet another surge as we spend more time indoors later this fall and winter. We also know that staying up to date on vaccines is the best way to protect yourself from COVID-19 and its most devastating consequences. And as the virus has evolved, the original vaccine is not as protective against the currently circulating strains as it was against the original virus. With that in mind, we have been planning for and gathering input on our approach to updated boosters since earlier this year. The FDA has extensive experience with evaluating strain changes for influenza vaccines and is confident in the data supporting these latest booster authorizations. And importantly, the approach we're taking with the updated COVID-19 booster vaccines mirrors how we have historically addressed changes for the influenza vaccine. Today, the FDA authorized updated boosters of both the Moderna and Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccines. These formulations of the vaccines are authorized for use as a single booster dose at least 2 months following primary or booster vaccination. These updated boosters are known as bivalent vaccines because they contain 2 messenger RNA components of SARS-CoV-2 virus, one from the original strain of SARS-CoV-2, and the other one in common between the BA.4 and BA.5 Omicron variant lineages of SARS-CoV-2. The authorization for the updated Moderna COVID-19 vaccine booster applies to individuals 18 years of age and older, and the authorization for the updated Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine booster applies to individuals 12 years of age and older. Individuals in these age groups are eligible for the respective boosters if it's been at least 2 months since they've completed primary vaccination or have received the most recent booster dose with any authorized or approved monovalent COVID-19 vaccine. The updated boosters contain the same basic ingredients as the original COVID-19 mRNA vaccines, but are modified to target the circulating Omicron variant BA.4 and BA.5, as well as the strain that was included in the original vaccines. These updated boosters meet the FDA's rigorous standards and are expected to help restore immune protection against COVID-19. The FDA's experienced staff evaluated and ultimately based its decision on the totality of available evidence. This included extensive safety and effectiveness data for each of the monovalent mRNA COVID-19 vaccines, which have been used by billions of people worldwide. Additionally, the agency evaluated safety and immunogenicity data obtained from a clinical study of a bivalent COVID-19 vaccine that contained mRNA from Omicron variant BA.1 lineage that is similar to each of the vaccines being authorized. Non-clinical data obtained using a bivalent COVID-19 vaccine that contained mRNA from Omicron variant BA.4 and BA.5 lineages were also evaluated. Dr. Marks will provide more detail on the considerations of the data for these authorizations. But before I turn it over to him, I want to make clear that these updated boosters present us with an opportunity to get ahead of the next predicated wave of COVID-19. These updated boosters are critical in helping protect teens and adults from the most serious outcomes of COVID-19 caused by the currently circulating variant. Regrettably, only about half of eligible Americans have received their first booster dose. And I want to pause here for just a minute to harken back to the CDC's announcement of our decline in life expectancy. Other CDC data indicate that those who are up to date on their vaccines have a 13-fold lower risk of dying from COVID compared to those with no vaccination, and a 3-fold lower dose of dying than those who only had 1 booster compared to 2. So this is a remarkable opportunity to improve our life expectancy and reduce the toll of mortality in our population. As a clinician, then, I urge all individuals to consider receiving a booster and encourage other practitioners to speak to their patients about the importance of these boosters. And for those who may be wondering, CDC says you may get a COVID-19 booster at the same time as your annual flu shot. Thank you, and I'll now turn it over to Dr. Marks.
Thank you, Dr. Califf. It's a pleasure to join all of you today. Throughout the pandemic, the FDA has worked quickly on behalf of the public health to make science-based decisions based on the best available evidence during this unprecedented public health emergency. We're very confident in the data used to support today's actions, particularly as we seek to stem the current wave of COVID-19 and hopefully stave off the coming wave of COVID-19 predicted by scientific models. As Dr. Califf mentioned, the FDA looked at the totality of the evidence in making the decision regarding these updated boosters. First, we know a tremendous amount about the original COVID-19 vaccines. With hundreds of millions of doses administered in the US and billions given globally, we know that the COVID-19 vaccines are not only effective in protecting against the most severe consequences of COVID-19, but that these vaccines are also very safe. Several factors make us highly confident in these authorizations as well. First, we have a lot of clinical experience with the mRNA vaccine technology, since the mRNA COVID-19 vaccines have now been given to more than 200 million people in the United States itself. Second, one of the vaccines studied in the clinical trials by the manufacturers was quite similar to the vaccines we are authorizing today. The bivalent vaccines they studied contained a component of the original strain's mRNA combined with mRNA from the BA.1 Omicron variant, and the studies tell us a fair amount about how the BA.4/5 variant bivalent vaccines may behave. Third, we also analyzed data from non-clinical studies of the vaccines authorized today. While these data were by no means the sole basis of our analysis, they provided the FDA with data to demonstrate that these vaccines successfully evoke an immune response in the same way previous versions of the vaccine have. And finally, we've had extensive experience in the past with strain changes made without clinical data based on the totality of available evidence. This is the case for influenza vaccines, for which such strain changes are made safely and effectively every year. Based on the data, the updated boosters are expected to provide increased protection against the currently circulating Omicron variant. Additionally, side effects of the boosters are expected to be similar to those commonly reported by individuals who receive the authorized or approved mRNA monovalent vaccines. Importantly, ongoing studies will provide further insight into the specific level and robustness of protection from the bivalent boosters. Ultimately, the public can rest assured that a great deal of care has been taken by the FDA to ensure that these updated boosters meet our rigorous safety, effectiveness, and manufacturing quality standards for emergency use authorization. We'll continue to follow the science and will work quickly to evaluate future data and submissions as we receive them to support authorization of updated COVID-19 boosters for additional age groups. Finally, if you've not yet received a booster dose, or it's been several months since your last booster dose, now's the time to consider getting one. Also, if you've not yet vaccinated your children, now's a great time to consider taking them along to receive their vaccination as well. I'd now like to turn the press conference back over to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Califf and Dr. Marks. We'll now move to the question and answer portion of the call. As a reminder, if you have a question, please raise your hand via the participant panel. When you are selected, please unmute your mic and turn on your camera. Our first question comes from Liz White at Wall Street Journal.
Hi, Dr. Marks and Dr. Califf. Two questions. The press release said something about withdrawing or kind of implied that the earlier boosters, the monovalent boosters, are no longer an option. So are you withdrawing those emergency use authorizations for that? And then the second question is, can you just talk about the science of why people should wait 2 months after their last dose of vaccine before getting a booster?
Yeah, I think I'll ask Dr. Marks to answer both of those good questions.
So thanks very much. First of all, we want to make sure that adults and the adolescents covered by this this authorization are able to get the most up-to-date version of a booster vaccine, and that's why we are no longer authorizing the monovalent, the original booster for administration as a booster dose to those populations, despite the fact that they will remain. That original vaccine will remain what is given for the primary series, the first 2 doses of the mRNA vaccines. And the rationale for the 2-month window is that it's twofold. First of all, if one tries to give too many vaccines right on top of one another, one may not have the kind of immune response than one would like to the additional vaccine. So this gives some space between vaccination. And the second issue is that it also helps balance the risk-benefit in terms of risks that may come from something like the uncommon risk of myocarditis, which can come if these vaccines are potentially, they seem to be associated with when they're given closer to one another. And there are some other considerations as well, but I think that is probably some 2 of the main ones. Thank you.
And if I may, Peter, I would just stress on point number 1, that original vaccine is still available, and we're recommending it for those. I mean, probably the people that have the most to gain from this are those who have not had any vaccination yet. It's a minority of Americans in that category, but if we look at who's dying and getting sick enough to go in the hospital with a COVID infection, the highest risk people are those who have not been vaccinated. And we're recommending that those people get the original vaccine to get a foundation of that basic immune response that's needed. And then later they can get the booster with the updated vaccine.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lauren Gardner at Politico.
Hi there. Thanks for your patience while I figure out technology that I should know. This question kind of follows on the last one, actually, and is kind of the inverse. Can you explain, Dr. Marks, why a 2-month gap as opposed to, say, a longer period of time, particularly for the younger folks who are covered by these authorizations? Just given that the original gap for a booster dose, I believe, was 5 months, and we still saw an association with rare, but still out there, the risk of myocarditis, and that dose, while not as strongly as after the second primary dose, still existed after the booster. Can you kind of get into a little bit more detail as to why 2 months as opposed to not a longer period of time?
Yeah, these great questions here. So this is a benefit risk consideration. So right now we have the BA.5 variant, which is close to 90% of what's circulating. What we gave to people originally is very poorly effective against symptomatic disease from that BA.5 variant. Now, it's true that we believe that there is some reasonable protection, particularly in younger people still, against severe outcomes. But against, in terms of trying to stave off serious outcomes and symptomatic disease, one needs to refresh the immune system with what is actually circulating. And so it's a benefit risk here. We believe that the benefits of receiving a booster now, at least 2 months after, are going to outweigh the risk. And I think we're really focusing a lot here on 2 months, but if you look at the average time that since most people have been boosted, it will be many months more than that. And for half of Americans, it's going to probably be more than a year, because the half who have not ever received a booster got their primary series and really could use this third dose. In fact, getting this third dose of vaccine for those individuals who only received a primary series can probably reduce by more than half their chance of long COVID if they get COVID-19. So there are a variety of reasons, and that's published in the Journal of American Medical Associations in July of this year. So this is a reason to try to move forward to help bring us protection now. Another reason for getting this out there, just is in case you look at modeling, is that we are looking at a possible fall wave with a peak around December 1st. And by giving the booster now, we will hopefully both control the current plateau that we're in, even though we're dropping off very slowly, as well as address this future potential wave that looms out there.
Yeah, I'd like to just reemphasize what Dr. Marks said about long COVID. You know, our data on long COVID are obviously not as strong as the protection against death and hospitalization. But as more data come in and you look at it, it's convincing that the more up to date you are in your vaccination, the more and likely the more updated your vaccination for this variant, the greater the chance that you'll be protected with a reduced risk of long COVID, which for young people is increasingly a major concern.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Cheyenne Hazlitt at ABC.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. How confident are you both that these new bivalent boosters will better protect against COVID? For example, do you think there will be less breakthrough cases, or do you feel confident that it will protect even better against hospitalizations and death? What do you anticipate?
Dr. Marks, I'll let you start with this one too.
Okay, so thanks. So that's a good question, and the question is, you know, what does the BA.4/5 component potentially add here? It is matched to what is currently circulating, and the hope here is that by increasing the amount of antibodies we have to that particular variant, we will restore the kind of protection that we had when we first saw these vaccines launched in the late part of 2020 and early part of 2021, where we had very good protection against symptomatic disease. We don't know for a fact yet whether we will get to that same level, but that is the goal here, and that is what we believe the evidence that we've seen helps point to. But obviously, we'll be conducting vaccine surveillance to see how closely we've gotten to this. But just let me make it clear that even giving another prototype booster, the same original version of the vaccine, would probably help us, but it might only help us for a short period of time. The idea here is not just to increase the antibodies right now, but also to hopefully give us a longer duration of protection, because the hope here is not to have to give lots of vaccines each year. It's hopefully to have this be the vaccine that hopefully holds us for as much of this or for the entire season if it can.
Yeah, if I might add a little perspective, you know, I was commissioner in 2016, also a relatively quiescent period with regard to American health. We didn't have a pandemic going on. And a big difference here is we have to be a step ahead, or at least we have to try to be a step ahead, because if we waited for all the proof to come in, the wave will have already passed us by and the damage will have been done. And I know that you're aware that we had a major advisory committee meeting in July. Dr. Marks has already referred to it. The advice was clear from the panel that to go with an Omicron-specific vaccine. We know the circulating variant. It's remarkable how the messenger RNA technology enabled a rapid turnaround of the vaccine. But it's still the case that, you know, the proof will be in the pudding of the surveillance that Dr. Marks said. But this is the best judgment. I can't, I think you know how many people weighed in on this, and it's fair for people to raise questions. But this really is the best consensus that we have among the experts that this is the best way to go. And particularly watching, it's just painful to see people dying unnecessarily when there's a free treatment that would prevent their death. And as a cardiologist in my career, I spent my career trying to save lives. This is much more clear than anything I've ever seen.
Thank you. Our next question is from Matt Herber at STAT. I would just like to remind all reporters to please unmute and put your camera on as well.
All right, sorry, John, I'm using technology. I know that I hear the confidence you guys have in the data here, but when will we have clinical data on either of these bivalent vaccines in terms of immunogenicity data? And what's the timeline for surveillance data to measure safety? When can people expect to learn more?
Before Dr. Marks answers, you can imagine how many discussions we've had about this. And a caution that, Matt, I know that you know a lot about is if we jump to preliminary data, we can be easily misled one direction or the other. So giving an exact date is going to be really hard to do, but no one's more anxious than we are to have the data available and to get it out there once we have solid data to talk about. So Dr. Marks, you might comment on your latest discussions with the manufacturers.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Califf is right. We want to make sure that when we make data available publicly, that we're confident in those data, because a couple of times during this pandemic, I personally have experienced where we went forward too quickly and had double back. So I think we want to make sure that when we come out with data, it's data that we trust, and that will probably be we're probably at least 1 to 2 months off from having those data because of the time it takes to actually dose and then do the assays, et cetera. That said, both manufacturers are diligently conducting the clinical trials that are needed to get this done.
Dr. Marks, would you be willing to share what those moments were when you had to go back and change based on early data?
I think I'm willing to just say that I think some of the convalescent plasma experience, as you may well know, was a little bit challenging, and I'll leave it at that.
And Matt, I know you know this, but we could recount hundreds of times in the history of clinical trials where looking at interim preliminary data has been misleading.
Thank you. Our next question is from Fiona Rutherford at Bloomberg. Please turn on your camera and unmute your mic.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Some people have expressed that there is no human data showing that these boosters are effective or add much incremental benefit. So could you explain, do you have any comments on that?
Well, Fiona, I feel like we've covered it, but I think it's worth reiterating, because I know this is the #1 question that people are asking, and there's been a lot of discussion in the press about it already. So I'll ask Dr. Marks sort of to go through the hierarchy of evidence or the totality of evidence as he described it.
Yeah, no, thanks. So what we're doing here is what we do every year for influenza vaccine, which is we understand how the vaccine works really well. And that's something that I think we understand about the mRNA vaccine platform. There is a genetic sequence in the that is basically that encodes a protein, and that is what we're using here for vaccination. So we understand how the vaccine works. We understand from 2 different manufacturers how they've 3 times over now for 3 different variants besides the original vaccine have made they've made boosters potentially because we thought we might need them for other variants such as Delta or Omicron BA.1, and they've shown that they produce very good immune responses in humans, and they were safe, granted in a small number of individuals relatively, but in aggregate now, in enough people to feel comfortable that when we change the sequence of these vaccines, we will see an immune response to the protein that's produced that will be robust. We have those data from humans, plus we have non-clinical data, again, data from animal experiments that help bolster our impression that this should produce a better response. And that's our expectation for these, and we'll see whether that's borne out. Again, no matter what, honestly, we get in terms of incremental benefit here, it's really important for people to think about getting boosted, because that prototype, that original booster that's there, plus this, will hopefully give us the kind of immunity we need right now to, again, tamp down the wave we have going through the country now, and hopefully bring us the protection we need through October, November, December to prevent yet another wave that shuts down things like holiday plans, et cetera.
Yeah, I'd like to emphasize the point made that people should remember that this contains the prototype vaccine also. So the BA.4/5 component is additional to the prototype. And so people should have confidence that there will be a boost in immune status, just like the previous boosters I've done. And again, I'd emphasize, we're not talking about trivial things here. We're talking about prevention of death and hospitalization as an outcome. It's just me, but I'll also tell you, I'm turning 71 next month. I will be at the front of the line at the pharmacy getting my vaccination. I'm very confident about this.
Thanks very much. Our next question is from Danny Al-Farouk at RAPS.
Thanks so much, Dr. Marks and Dr. Califf. I wanted to ask, the UK approved the bivalent that included the BA.1 component, but the US waited until we got the BA.4 and BA.5. Could you kind of talk about the reasoning behind why we waited, especially considering Moderna said they had tens of millions of doses waiting in their stockpile? And secondly, kind of, I know we've kind of covered a lot of this, but when you talk about non-clinical data, is that animal studies that you're talking about? And if so, is this the first time, or has there been a situation in the past where you've allowed this kind of vaccine on the market simply based on animal studies?
Well, I do appreciate the questions, and as you might imagine, there have been a lot of discussions with international regulators about the BA.1 versus BA.4/5. And Dr. Marks has had many more of those discussions than I have, including very recently. I think you'll have an interesting perspective to share there. But again, I want to take exception to your comment about only animal studies. I think Dr. Marks reviewed the totality of evidence that this is a type of vaccine that has now been given to billions of people, and we have a good understanding of how it works. So it's not like something just coming out of the hopper with just animal studies. But Dr. Marks, if you could comment.
No, I'll start with that second part. I think we're pretty confident that what we have is very similar to the situation that we've done in the past with influenza strain changes, where we don't do clinical studies for them in the United States. We know from the way the vaccine works and from the data that we have that we can predict how well the vaccine will be working. Now, clearly, influenza is very challenging because it's constantly changing as well. Just to back up, though, into the difference between BA1 and BA4-5. This, I really appreciate the question. It's an opportunity to just make this clear. We very deliberately picked BA4-5 for several reasons. First of all, right now, BA1 is no longer circulating in the United States. It's not there. We have about 90%, 88%, I think, as of Nowcast yesterday, 88% BA5, about 6% BA4.6. And so this gives us a variant that is most up to date and will most likely look closer to something that may evolve further in the fall. It's no guarantee, but the idea here is the more up to date you are, the better chance we have of looking at what may come afterwards. Additionally, there's a slightly technical point that I will make. The BA1 immunogen, the protein itself, is not quite as good from studies that have done. It's not quite as good as the BA4-5. Those are suggestive studies. They're not definitive, but they suggest that, and they seem to be confirmed by a study that has been published by Penny Moore from South Africa, where it was shown that the immune response in that population, now this is not to vaccine, this is to natural infection, but the immune response to the BA4-5 variant was much more robust against a variety of other variants, including BA1, Delta, Beta, than the response to BA1. So that, again, goes into this totality of evidence that makes us feel comfortable that this was a good choice.
And let me just add, lest it sound like we're just in an international argument here, it really, if we look at the hierarchy of what's important, the number one thing is that people get boosted and up to date. Far and away, number one. The BA4-5 is icing on the cake, and based on the scientific reasoning that Dr. Marks has put forward. But I think we'd all agree that if you're not up to date and you haven't been boosted at all, or you haven't been vaccinated, that's the primary issue here.
Thank you. Our next question is from Alex Tin at CBS.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Can you explain for us what are the data you're waiting for to authorize these same kind of changes, but in the primary series for adults? And what are the data you're waiting for to make that same kind of change for boosters down to 6 months old? When should we expect those decisions? Thanks so much.
Peter, yeah, if you're
happy. Let me take the second question, because I know from I appreciate the letters from parents who are very interested in these, and I actually appreciate the fact that they've been very polite. Actually, they want to know when they're going to have their boosters. I appreciate that. We are waiting for the companies to submit data from children on these, and we would expect. Again, I can't promise an exact timing, but we expect to start seeing the age range drop down into the younger age ranges within the next 1 to 2 months. And so as we get submissions from the companies, we will act on them with all due diligence, because we're aware that there are, particularly in the slightly older age ranges of children, some children that are coming due for boosters. So that's that situation. As for the issue of when we move to the bivalent type of vaccine for the primary series, we had a discussion of this at our vaccines advisory committee meeting. This topic came up. We're considering this a transitional year where we feel like everyone needs to get this base of immunity that we understand really well, because 500 million people in the world have received it. And we believe that building on that is important. So those who have not yet been vaccinated, if they decide to go out and get vaccinated, which I hope they will either get their 2 doses 3 or 4 weeks apart, and then 2 months after that, they'll be up to date as well when they go get their booster. So I think this makes sure that everyone has this good base upon which we build upon, which will help protect us against the unknown. Probably, if I had to say what keeps me up at night most in this pandemic, it's that we have seen lots of twists and turns that were hard to predict. So it's the unknown unknowns that really are concerning. So we don't know what may come up later this year. And by doing this, we've tried to mitigate against that by making sure that we understand the protection very well, the base level of protection that people have.
And can you clarify, so in children down to 6 months, it's administration of the BA.4/5 booster, that's the data you're waiting for, not the BA.1?
So it's a variety, there's a variety of different data, and I can't go into what might be in pending submissions, but there's a variety of different data that may be coming in.
Yeah, I would just emphasize so far our vaccination rate in the younger children is very low in this country, and I hope parents will pick up the pace on vaccination of younger children.
And I just have to pile on to Dr. Califf's comment here, because there are some concerns. We keep in touch with pediatricians and adult doctors across the country, and there are some concerns coming in from pediatric hospitals. The press on the call can feel free to check in with some of them, that they've started to see increasing rates of hospitalization of kids, even while the adult their hospitalization rates may be coming down some. So yet another reason to consider having your child vaccinated.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. Our last question is from Mike Ehrman at Reuters. Please unmute your mic and turn on your camera.
Hi, thanks. I'm wondering what the FDA is hoping the effect will be of running a broader revaccination campaign that includes young, healthy Americans versus the more limited campaign that was run earlier this year. And what's the evidence that these updated boosters are going to offer increased protection for younger, healthy Americans versus older and immunocompromised Americans?
Well, let me start out just by saying that far and away, the number one thing is to get the high-risk people vaccinated. So we do want to emphasize that. People my age are very much at risk compared to younger people for death and hospitalization particularly. But I think we've also been heavily influenced by the emerging data about long COVID, which, if anything, is stacked preferentially in the younger people. And of course, I used to be young, so I remember that you feel invincible when you're young, and you don't think about this until you happen to get sick. But once you get long COVID, it looks like from the data, it's there for a long time. And so this combination of factors, I think, turns out to be very important in younger people. I'm sure Dr. Marks will want to correct anything I said wrong there.
Dr. Califf said it very well. I think, Michael, I think the issue here is very true. I know that let's be open and honest, there are some critics that say we only should be concerned about the older population here. But I would say to you that given what we know of long COVID, and given the number of telephone calls I take from 20 to 30-year-olds who have long COVID, that we really do need to take seriously the fact that in aggregate now we have millions of Americans who have long COVID symptoms. And that I can tell you from interacting with some of them, it's very real. The brain fog, in some cases, the mood changes, people who used to be very bright and cheery, who now are anxious and depressed. Those things seem to be very real, and they are actually well described now. And so I think the ability to try to reduce that long COVID, particularly again for the half of people who have never been boosted, those are the people who are actually at most risk of those long COVID symptoms. If you've never had a vaccine, you're really at highest risk for those if you get COVID. And if you've never been boosted, you're at reasonably high risk. So those would be the reasons. We could probably go into other reasons about trying to decrease the replication of this virus, trying to decrease transmission. but we know that these vaccines are not perfect there. But we could make the public health case there as well. But I'll leave it at that. Really, hopefully, long COVID itself is one of the good rationales here for people to get vaccinated.
Do you expect that you'd be?
Oh, it looks like he froze. I think he was going to ask, do you expect you'll be able to prevent it? And I would say if anything is going to prevent transmission in long COVID, it's going to be a variant-specific vaccine for the variant that's currently circulating. That's actually highly motivational to us because the waning of effectiveness against infection as the variants change is something that we'd like to be able to preempt, so to speak.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us here today and participating in this press conference. We invite you to visit our website at fda.gov for more information about the authorizations. This concludes today's FDA press conference. A replay will be available on the FDA's YouTube page. If you have follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact the FDA press office at fdaoma@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you and have a great day.